Hello, welcome back to Cosmic Spectrum Art. Reference Wednesdays is a series where I do some studies using artist reference photo packs made by Studio Graphite. Link in the description and I'll get back to that later. So I am finally continuing the series with episode 9, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep this video very relaxed and show you some real-time footage of me doing some gesture warm-ups in my sketchbook from a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to tell you about why I took such a long break and what I've been up to for the past few weeks. I don't know how long it's been at this point, probably like 4 weeks at least, but anyways. I also want to talk about some studying tips that are more focused on mental health rather than improvement or hard work. And actually, I don't even know if it's going to be studying tips, really, just kind of a general topic about mental health, sort of, in relation to being an artist. Yeah. And this is kind of like a casual chat, so a draw with me type of session, if you will, to keep you company. Light a scented candle and make yourself some tea or a nice latte, and let's draw together. Before I get into it, I wanted to mention that all the photos that I'm going to be using for this particular warm-up session come from a Studio Graphite photo reference pack called Hyper Angle Female Pose Reference Pictures. And I have a link in my description as well as a 20% off code for any Studio Graphite reference pack. I highly recommend their packs. I use them myself all the time. They're super useful and they have a huge variety of both costumed and nude and semi-nude type of references that are really useful for artists. So yeah, check it out, link in my description. And now on to the rest of the video. Firstly, a quick catch-up about what I've been up to. So through a series of poor decision making, I found myself slammed with freelance work a couple of months ago, despite promising myself that I will not do any more freelance work for the foreseeable future. A promise made at the end of last year, believe it or not. I guess a long enough amount of time passed for me to have wandered out of the quote-unquote foreseeable future category, and I ended up just making a bunch of self-sabotaging moves that led me straight back into the arms of freelance once again. It's definitely a circular type of situation that I have found myself in many times before. So here's the brief story of what happened. I believe that when I first made the decision to step away from freelance and focus on my own projects at the end of last year at some point, the freelance naturally dried up, and I have been thinking a lot about shifting my focus to more personal projects, so I just right away interpreted the freelance drying up as a sign and as pretty much like my green light to pursue my personal projects. And for some time, I actually did that, and very successfully. I focused on doing some new merch, some of which was like some of my favorite things that I've ever produced, which were the sticker packs, sticker sets specifically for journaling, because I don't know if you guys know, some of you may know, but I'm a big fan of journaling, and I keep a bullet journal and use it every single day. But anyways, so I put so much work and so much effort into these projects, and by these projects I mean like the sticker sets, which anyways, long story short, I put a ton of time into this stuff, and it really did pay off because, first of all, it was always just the best feeling. It's always the best feeling to receive products from projects that I did on my own time, and just made them about the stuff that I love only, with no direction from anybody else or no outside sources just like telling me what to do or anything like that. So yeah, it was very rewarding to actually take a look at the end product of those types of projects. But there were a lot of difficulties that I had to go through as well, because as some of you may know, but if you don't, the manufacturing process of any types of merchandise or actual products can be quite difficult just all the way from figuring out how to set up files to finding the right manufacturer, ensuring the quality, communicating, like making adjustments, and there's like a million random things that go into the most seemingly simple projects. So I digress. It was very, very difficult for me to finally get some of the stuff that I've been working on for so long made, and that's where I think my burnout kind of began when it came to the personal project type stuff. So on the side from that, I was putting more time into working on developing my comic series project, and I am happy to say that I have been able to make the most progress with that I have ever done in the last several years. So I actually did start the script after preparing for it endlessly and like figuring out all the plot lines and character arcs and whatnot. So I actually have finished writing the first 2 chapters of that, and I have outlined the next 2 as well. But besides that, essentially when I published my new products on my store, they did really well, but in all that excitement, I kind of neglected to plan ahead and like have a plan for future products. And it's just so happened that around that time, I think it was like tax season, so I got really preoccupied with trying to count my taxes. And from there, it was kind of like a slow descent into just lack of organization and crumbling under the pressure, like outside pressures of not being able to plan things out properly, and then also just dealing with all sorts of random situations as they came up. And as a result, I just ended up like making a bunch of weird spontaneous decisions when it came to what to work on that took me in all sorts of different directions. For instance, I ended up taking a random commission that was not like an official type of freelance, because I haven't done like personal commissions in ages. That's not something I do any longer, but it was for a friend, and I don't know, I just kind of succumbed under the pressure of not wanting to turn down a friend, I guess. But that was a mistake because like that was one of the first mistakes that I made. And then after that, I went even further into the hole of like being unsure of what to focus on, because as much as I was keeping up with YouTube videos, I still hadn't made any progress for making new merch. And with new merchandise, it just takes so much planning ahead, because before you can actually release something, there's like a million steps that you need to take, and you need to really, really plan ahead of time. And even though I was in the middle of making a new sticker set, I just ended up pretty much abandoning it for several months, like literally until I finally got back to working on it 2 days ago. So yeah, and leading up to that, I just made like some small, like it's hard to kind of talk about this without it being in a conversational format, because I do know that I have a tendency to go on tangents, and I do try to bring myself back to the actual topic. And now I'm trying to remember what the actual topic was, but yeah, essentially I was trying to explain what led me into this place that gave me a lot of burnout and essentially just gave me a ton of anxiety in the end. It was basically just succumbing under pressures that come up and making like the wrong decisions career-wise, because I think that after a certain point of having tried many things and having worked with people, having briefly worked at a studio, having done some stuff independently, it really becomes a very difficult decision-making process, because it's tough to turn down new projects as they present themselves, but it's also tough to keep up with personal projects because they take so much more discipline without the outside deadlines being a factor. And so this is essentially this type of juggling game that I've been playing for the past few years, and which each year I think I understand a little more about what I actually want to spend my time on doing. And I'm trying to view this year as kind of a transitional year where hopefully I learned this lesson for the last time. And so long story short, I ended up a couple of months ago, I ended up accepting 2 freelance projects simultaneously, and that quickly put me in a position where I basically had no time to do my own personal stuff. And I also had to, for a little while, I did keep up with making the Reference Wednesday videos at the same time as working on this freelance stuff, but eventually got to a point where that was just too taxing and I could not keep up, and I was starting to really pile the expectations high on myself, and it just was not going well. So I decided to take a break from the YouTube stuff, and obviously that was a calculated decision based on the fact that I made some commitments to clients, and obviously I could not let them down because I do not take that kind of responsibility lightly. So of course I had to put the rest of my involvement with any personal project or with YouTube on the back burner while I was working on the commission stuff, the client work and stuff. And oh man, I don't even know if I want to get into the details of what that has been like. A lot of the time with client work, my expectations are end up being way off, and I expect something to go super smooth or be super fun, and it ends up being the exact opposite. Sometimes that tends to happen, sometimes it's the opposite of that, so it's very kind of unpredictable. But I know that all in all, it tends to be bad for my mental health in the long run, is the general pattern that I've noticed. Because the other general pattern I've noticed is that finances or financial stability tends to be at the top of my anxiety causers, so I will always generally prioritize that. But I am starting to believe that that's just a wrong way of going about it, because that focuses on the wrong thing, and I essentially end up making an income at the expense of my mental health, even though if I do put sufficient effort into making projects that actually make me happy on an emotional level, they still produce very decent financial results. So that was a long segue that takes me to the topic that I kind of wanted to talk about, and that topic is the failure to be reliable to yourself in the context of having an art career. So this is kind of a personal struggle that I've been dealing with for as long as I can remember, and I just wanted to share my thoughts about this with you guys. First of all, I want to give you some context. What do I mean exactly by reliable to yourself? It seems like a kind of a generic statement, so I'm just gonna explain that a little bit. So essentially, what ends up happening is that on a day-to-day basis, you have internal dialogue, and everyone does. You will think about, that's how you make decisions. You'll consider the options in your head, and your internal dialogue will help you come to a decision that will, lead you in certain directions. And typically, my internal dialogue always leads me to the conclusion that I want to work on my personal project, and I would really like to give them a proper chance without constantly diverting my attention elsewhere for the sake of short-term monetary gain or whatnot. So yeah, that's the internal dialogue that I've been having, and yet I keep going against that. So every time I feel the slight bit of pressure increasing when it comes to pursuing personal projects, I will just succumb to the pressure and get too stressed out and get too unsure about the direction that I'm going in, because self-sabotage is a serious problem, and I do think it's a very common problem with artists as well. But yeah, so I think what ends up happening is somehow timing wise is uncanny that every time I start getting to that mental place, I will have a bunch of freelance work pop up, and then I will just accept it because I am in a weak point where I'm very easy. Like the decisions that I made came mostly from fear and just uncertainty. So that's not a good way to make decisions, and I think that's basically what I'm trying to say, or basically what I mean by failure to be reliable to yourself, because what I end up doing is making myself a bunch of promises and then constantly breaking them, and that really shatters the internal stability emotionally. I found, like, especially over time, I think it's pretty crucial to understand that the relationship that you have with yourself is not to be trifled with, and it's not to be taken lightly, because I don't think this is news in particular, or like I think any sort of mental health educated person or somebody who knows about psychology understands that the way the brain works is basically like you have a bunch of personalities that reside all together inside your head, and it's not like it's just you. And generally what tends to happen is those different personalities or aspects of you that have different needs and have different goals just kind of battle it out in your head all day every day, and that's how you make decisions. And the more in harmony you are with the whole of your personas that make up the entirety of your personality, generally the more stable and good life tends to feel. But the more fragmented and at war on the inside you are, the worse it starts to feel, and that's when a lot of things start to creep up, such as like depression and anxiety. And I mean, I will say that I don't think this is necessarily like 100% true. It could be, it could not be. It doesn't really matter. Like the way that I look at these things tends to be in a way of like I will just choose to believe what sounds like it makes the most sense to me, and that does make the most sense to me, so I choose to believe it. And you don't have to take this information as fact, it's just my personal opinion / set of beliefs. Anyways, so yeah, I from personal experience I have noticed that if I just keep doing this, like by this I mean making promises to myself consciously and then breaking them, or like failing to be there to kind of like satisfy my own expectations that I set for myself, it really deteriorates my mental stability, like the way that I feel in general. So I start to have anxiety randomly about things that don't even seem to make any sense, and yeah, things just tend to go downhill. And the point that I'm trying to make is that I think as an artist, when you become so involved in your career and like when what you do is such a big part of your life, it's very important to take it seriously and not break the promises that you make to yourself. And also it's not such a simple thing. Like you can't just be like, oh, I promise that I will finish writing the script for this comic that I want to do in the next week. Like that's unreasonable. The whole trick of this never-ending process is to keep recalibrating and actually set reasonable expectations of yourself. And this actually takes me to the next thing that I wanted to talk about, which is the fact that social media is an illusion, and it's not it's not an illusion as a whole, but it creates a lot of illusions, and a lot of the illusions that it creates are kind of like projections, and essentially your interpretation of somebody else's social media is more often than not just an illusion. Like for instance, to put this into more specific context, some of the issues that I typically face when it comes to my relationship with social media and artists I follow and admire is I will inevitably slip into some sort of comparison, but this comparison goes far beyond the quality of work. In fact, quality of work pretty much never enters this equation, so I don't want to make this about some sort of imposter syndrome, which is very real. A lot of people experience it, and sometimes I experience it too, but that's not specifically what I wanted to talk about. What I wanted to talk about is productivity, feeling unproductive, feeling undercommitted compared to somebody else, measuring your own self-worth against somebody else's productivity / your productivity, and especially the fear of missing out. For me, fear of missing out is, as I've noticed after thinking about it, is actually one of my biggest problems with social media. And I'm so happy that it's something that finally came to my attention, and I was able to put my finger on what makes me so what makes me dart back and forth between different types of work and unable to just fully commit for any sustained amount of time to one thing, is mostly based on fear of missing out. Essentially what happens is I will open up Instagram, which happens pretty much automatically at this point without me even consciously deciding to go on my phone and open Instagram. It's just my hands just do it. And I will see a stream of other artists' posts, and everything just looks so well presented and well crafted. But the problem is that I have so many different interests and I like to follow different types of artists. The problem is that I will see them posting the results, the shiny results of all sorts of artistic pursuits. I follow a ton of artists that focus on making merchandise, making all sorts of different types of merchandise. Or there's a bunch of artists that I follow that focus on beautiful paintings, digital paintings, and then there's more. There's a million different categories. And then after scrolling for a while, I start to feel this panic, I want to do this too, this looks so fun and I really love doing that. And then my mind just starts generating all sorts of ideas and how I would do something, and that just tends to really throw me off track, because then my mind loses its focus on the current project and starts fantasizing about other projects. And I'm sure this is a very common thing, but for some reason I have never actually attributed this to fear of missing out. And I kind of noticed this in a way that is not a pleasant feeling. It's not really inspiration. It comes from a more negative side. It feels more oh no, I should be doing this. Oh, what I'm doing right now is not enough. I should switch and do something more like this because it seems better. This looks like a better direction to go in. This looks like a better direction to take my career. And yeah, that's kind of the trap that I fell into pretty hard a few months ago, because it started with just first of all being unable to say no to opportunities, because there does kind of tend to come a time in a career, if you're diligent and you work hard and you start building a name for yourself, where you do kind of get more opportunities to do projects or collaborations than you actually have physical time for. And I am having a really hard time just choosing between those things and actually saying no to some of them, which I really should, because it ends up just backing me into a corner where I have a million things to do and it just seeps all my energy. But anyways, yeah, my point back to the social media being an illusion thing. Another thing I want to talk about was how productivity, the way that someone's page looks, or looking at somebody's portfolio, it just looks like this person spends all their time drawing, and I find that really destabilizing as well. because it just makes me feel like I am never producing enough content. And the funny thing is that I've heard from many people before that when they look at my social media, it looks like I draw all the time and it looks like I'm super productive as well, which to me is shocking, because all I ever feel like in relation to social media is not enough. Like, it's that I don't post enough, I don't dedicate myself enough, like, and all this other stuff, which just makes me less inclined to actually do it, because it just becomes more about pressure. So these days, what I'm trying to really focus on, to bring this all back in the circle to some positive advice, I guess, or basically just explaining what I'm trying to accomplish lately, is trying to reframe all the negative relationships that I have with all these things, and try to combat the thoughts of like fear of missing out or feeling unproductive, and instead focusing on just enjoying the things that I want to do, and also actually committing to things that I want to do, and paying attention to how projects make me feel on an emotional level. And sometimes taking a small pay cut, or even taking a substantial pay cut in order to pursue personal projects, is better than doing stuff that makes you miserable and creates better finances, I guess. But also, something I wanted to mention is that I think that financial abundance is not really limited, especially when you're an artist on social media. Like, there's so many opportunities, and I think there's so many ways to make money as an independent artist, that there's really no limitation as to how much financial abundance you can create there either, which essentially takes me to the last point that I want to briefly mention, and that just having faith in yourself or your ideas and what you think is important to pursue is so important. Because I've noticed that every time I make a decision that takes me in the wrong direction is always a time when I let my faith in what I consider to be important waver, and let my mind make up a bunch of excuses or reasons as to why it would be the better choice to take whatever work is, or like some sort of freelance project. So yeah, essentially it's I think having faith in the types of work that you want to do, and just choosing to pursue that, and not letting your mind like deceive you into making the wrong choices, is super important. That's something I'm constantly trying to learn, but hopefully I have finally gotten to a point where maybe this lesson will stick. And that being said, I am currently getting back to my personal projects, and hopefully I will pick up some steam and be able to actually focus on that and not betray myself again by doing work I don't want to do. So yeah, that was kind of a long talk, but I do really hope that you guys, maybe at least some of you, found it helpful, because I know that it is difficult to talk about stuff like this for me, but I'm glad I did it, because I don't want to just make content that's tutorials or like that's some sort of instructional stuff. I actually want to share my thoughts about my career as an artist and the types of things that I go through, both positive and negative, and hopefully that will resonate with you, or at least provide some sort of framework if you're dealing with any remotely similar situations. So yeah, thanks so much for listening to my video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.